So to allow the visitors of our website to enter some data, we need to present a form to them. And of course, for that, we can go to our template where I want to have that form, and we could add a form like this. And we could then start adding all the input fields which we want. In this case, an email input field because we're interested in the user email. And we could implement it like this. And there would be nothing wrong about that. And we can handle forms like this when working with Django. I also do show this approach in my course. But there is an even more convenient one. Again, using a lot of Django magic behind the scenes, if you want to call it like this. We can define a form class using an official feature offered by Django to let Django generate this form for us and to then also let Django handle the entire form validation and so on. And for this, in my meetups folder here, I'll add a new forms.py file next to admin.py and so on. And in there, we should import from Django the forms object here. And then we can create a class, which we could name registration form. The name is up to you, which should inherit from forms.modelform. This allows us to let Django infer a form and all the validation rules from a model we defined in our application. So therefore, I'll import from my models file, and from there, I'll import the participant model. Then we connect this registration form to a specific model by defining a meta class in there, a nested class, which might look strange, but is a default Python feature. And here in this meta class, we now define what the related model should be. We do this with a model key here, and we can set this equal to the model we want to connect this form to, or we want a Django let infer this form from, to be precise. So now with that, Django will look at this participant model and then infer a form from the fields defined in this model, which in this case is this email field and nothing else. But if we had more fields would be inferred. Now we use the meta class for this because in this overall registration form class, we could also add our own fields and form-specific configuration. But here I just want to have Django infer this form from that model like this. And we also then should add a fields key here where we specify a list of fields that should be included in the form. And here I'll use email. This would allow you to restrict the fields that should be populated through a form. If you had a model with more fields than just email, and maybe some fields should not be entered by your users, then you could only list the fields that should be populated by your users here in this fields field, in this fields property. In this case, I add email here, which is my only field, but with that I ensure that this model can be created by my visitors by using that form which Django is inferring for me. But that's all nice. How do we now use that form in this template? For this, we need to go to our views because the views are responsible for rendering the template. And here it's this meetup details view, which is important to us because there we render that detail page. And in here, I now want to make sure that my form gets rendered as well. So here we can now create the registration form by simply instantiating this registration form class we just worked on. So therefore, we need to import it from forms. We need to import the registration form. And then down here, we just instantiate registration form like this. Now we have a registration form object, and we can now pass that to our template. For example, under a form key, but the key name is up to you, of course. Now, if we do that, we can go back to the template, and here, instead of manually outputting this input now, we can interpolate form, or whichever key name you chose here. In my case, it's form. And then call as_ul on it, which will simply put every input label row into its own list item. And therefore we should wrap this with a ul element, which is of course just one way of presenting a form, but it is the approach I will use here. Now, a small side note about as_ul, there also is as_p as an alternative to render paragraphs which wrap your individual form inputs instead of list items. It's simply an alternative. But most importantly, it's worth pointing out that as_ul and as_p are actually methods on this form object which we instantiated in our view. And yet, as you can see here, there are no parentheses when we call this method here, when we call as_ul. And that's another special thing about the DTL, the Django templating language. When you invoke methods in there, no matter if you wrote them, so if you call a method on one of your objects, or if it's a method on a built-in object from Django, you don't add parentheses. You access your methods like regular properties. This is simply how it works here in your templates, and it is something you need to know. If you want to output the result of a method call, you just reference that method, so you just use it like this, like a property, and that's it. So now all the input label combinations will be rendered as list items in this unordered list. Please note that you still need to bring your own form HTML element. It's only the inputs which are being output by Django, but those are now rendered for you with help of that auto-inferred form. And that's not all Django will do for us here. Now I want to add a div below this unordered list, which I give an idea of registration actions. And in there, I want to have my submit button where I say register. If we do all of this, and we restart our development server here, then if I reload this page, I now got this form down there. Of course, it's just one input field here, but that's better than nothing. It is our form rendered automatically by Django. And if you inspect this input here, which was created by Django, you will notice that the input type here is email. And it is email because Django inferred this form and the inputs that would be needed and the form or the type of inputs that are needed from our model. And since I defined an email field here for email, Django was able to infer that an email input field should be rendered here when we output that form. But of course, outputting the form is just the first step. We also want to handle form submission.